Hi, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess. I hope you're doing well today, and I'm so happy you're here because we are doing my September reading wrap-up. In September, I read 7 books, and I only just realized as I'm filming that I am missing one from the stack because I only have 6, and I already took all my thumbnail photos. Yeah, I forgot to put a decoy book this month. The one that I'm missing is just a novella, so just imagine one extra of these on here. But yeah, so I read 7 books this month. The total number of pages that I read is 2,055, so I'm making up the difference from last month. And I did not listen to any audiobooks this month, so 0 hours. Only one of the books that I read this month was digital. I borrowed it from my library. The rest I own and are living here, obviously. That's because I own them. So let's get into the books that I read. Just a reminder for any of you that are new here, the way that I do my reading wrap-ups is I film them in batches as I finish a few books so that it's not as overwhelming at the end of the month for me. So now we're going to cut to past me, who did the first few books in September, and I will see you at the outro. The first book that I read in September is Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. You all know this girl. If you grew up in the late 2000s or the 2010s, you definitely read these, or maybe at least heard about them, maybe watched the movies. I read them for the first time when I was a teenager, and then because of Sunrise on the Readathon, hosted by Katie Coulson, I wanted to revisit the series. So because this one is a sequel, I'm not going to get too much into the plot, but it is Katniss and Peeta continuing after the events of the first book, kind of coming to terms with their new life after the Hunger Games and what that means for them. And meanwhile, this is all building up to the Quarter Quell, which is the 75th anniversary of the Hunger Games, so there's going to be a big, extra scary, extra terrible Hunger Games this year. And so they're preparing for that in the wake of the Hunger Games they were just in, and this book is just following those events, and honestly, I was shocked just how much they pack into this book. I kept thinking to myself, we're already so far into the book, and there's so many events that haven't happened yet. Also, Matcha's playing off screen. Just ignore any noises you hear. I don't know how much more to say about this one aside from it's iconic. There were so many amazing moments in this that I had to annotate. This one is by far my favorite of the series. I gave it 5 stars, and I probably would have given it a 5-star when I read it as a teenager. I always loved this one. I think it's my favorite Hunger Games. It has the most iconic moments, and it also deep dives more into the themes from the first book of oppression and revolution, but it also gets into themes of PTSD and grief, and I think that's also really interesting. So yeah, I definitely loved this one. I knew I was gonna love it, and I am a little bit tentative about going into Mockingjay. It's not my favorite, but so that was Catching Fire. The next book that I read in September is The Last Hour Between Worlds by Melissa Caruso. This is my Illumicrate edition. I took the dust jacket off. I do have it somewhere. I'll put a photo on the side with the actual title and the book cover and everything, but I really love the way that this Illumicrate edition looks with the dust jacket off. I think that the shattered mirror look is really cool. This is kind of a locked door mystery with some supernatural elements going on. There is a little bit of ambiguity of where or when this book is set, but it's vaguely historical. But in this world, there are multiple layers of reality called echoes, which are basically similar realities to our own, but they get progressively more and more unhinged and twisted as you go down. And I think there are 12. And people can traverse these echoes, but most of them are very dangerous, and you don't want to go too far down. My version has these gorgeous maps too, and the one on the right is the layers of reality, so the different echoes, and I think that was a nice little touch. My assistant Mochi has joined us, so he will be helping for the rest of the wrap-up, or at least until he decides to leave. So the locked door mystery aspect of this comes in when our main character Kimbrel is attending this fancy party. It's a New Year's Eve kind of equivalent party, and she has been on maternity leave, so she is just visiting this party and is going to go back home to take care of her baby afterwards. So she just figured she would pop in for a little bit and say hi to her coworkers and make an appearance, you know? That plan kind of goes to hell though, because shortly after she gets there, a strange horde of mask-wearing monsters show up and start killing people. And what a better way to come back from maternity leave, right? Meanwhile, at this party, there is this mysterious clock, and shortly after the murder, the clock starts tolling and reality shifts. Alright, see ya. So next thing she knows, Kimbrel and everyone else at the party are now in an echo reality. And the strange thing is, no one else remembers what just happened. So because she's the only one who remembers what the hell just happened, she's kind of reluctantly roped into this locked door, Groundhog Day, time repeating situation. And in the process of solving this mystery, she also ends up brushing shoulders with her ex-situationship, who is a spy. In addition to these reality-bending shenanigans going on, there's also deities involved and celestial beings. So if I could sum this up in one sentence, And so if I had to sum up this book in a sentence, I would say mortals, celestial beings, and otherworldly creatures duking it out in a game of 4D chess, except the chessboard is this mansion New Year's Eve party that gets progressively more and more fucked up and unhinged. I think this book was really fun. It's not like fucked up in a horror way. There's not really any horror in this. There are some gruesome death scenes, but I wouldn't really say that it gets into horror territory. I don't think the story was perfect. I did have some complaints about it, mainly the pacing. Because there is this repeating Groundhog Day mechanic going on, it's difficult to really feel super immersed in it when every chapter reality is shifting to the next echo and we're repeating the events that we just had, but things are slightly different. So it does get a little repetitive. It does get a little bit formulaic. I think that the visuals and the kind of weird twisted elements of the different echoes was really interesting, and I liked seeing, you know, what was happening inside the mansion but also outside the mansion, because they are able to go like some kind of distance away. And so they end up going outside the mansion and seeing different parts of the city, but through a very distorted kind of lens. And so I think it was interesting in that aspect. I do have some complaints in terms of like the characters having plot armor, or, you know, things being too coincidental to make a lot of sense. But overall, I did have a good time with this. I think if you enjoy a Groundhog Day type story, if you enjoy a locked door mystery, I did have fun with it, but it felt like it took me forever to get through. Like whatever time repeating stuff was going on, it was happening to me. I felt like I was just stuck in this book forever. It didn't even take me that long to read, but it felt like it took forever, and I think that's partly the pacing. So this technically does have a sequel, The Last Soul Among Wolves, I believe, but I think that this wrapped up perfectly. I don't even think you need a sequel. There wasn't any cliffhanger, and so I think that the second one is just kind of its own self-contained mystery with the same characters. I'm gonna just treat this as a standalone. I think that it definitely is something different, and if you want something unique and different that you haven't read before, maybe give it a try. Oh, I never said my rating. I gave this a 3.5 star, and I think that a lot of the time with me, specifically the 3.5 star rating is kind of the most fun, actually, because there's just so many different things that you are kind of feeling and different conflicting thoughts, and oftentimes there's a lot of highs and there's a lot of lows, and I think that the 3.5 star rating sometimes are just the most memorable books too, which is strange, but does that make any sense? I feel like maybe for me the 3.5 is like, I don't really know how I feel about it. I kind of had a good time. I kind of had a not so good time, but like largely a good experience, because otherwise I would have given it a 3. So that was The Last Hour Between Worlds. The next book that I finished in September is... Sorry if you hear paper bag crinkling. By the way, Mochi is playing with like 3 toys right now on top of a paper bag. If you guys have cats, you definitely know this. If the cats like the trash, it's just decor. It's just part of the house. I just pointed at you with the book, so you got a sneak preview of it, but the next book that I finished in September is To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. If you've been on my channel for a little bit, you know I love Becky Chambers. I'm obsessed with the Wayfarer series. It's one of my favorite sci-fi series. I really loved the monk and robot duology. Yeah? And so I was really looking forward to this one. I've heard nothing but good things for it, nothing but praise for it. Unfortunately, it just didn't really work for me, and I'll get more into that towards the end, but let me just explain what this is about first. This is a short little sci-fi novella following 4 astronauts who are out on a space expedition together, and it follows these 4 astronauts who are also scientists as they are going to different alien planets and gathering data, learning about any life forms that are on the planet or the conditions that may or may not be hospitable to life. And so this does have a little bit of dense scientific information. It has a lot of discussing data and discoveries, so if you like science, you might like this. It is a little bit dry. It has a slightly academic tone at times, a little bit textbooky when they're explaining kind of the biology or the chemistry behind certain things, but not overly dense, and I think that it's very approachable. So there's the aspect of the scientists in space. They're exploring and gathering information about these planets, and meanwhile there's also a slight mystery going on about Earth and what is going on Earth, because these astronauts have been kind of in limbo for so long as they're traveling from one planet to the next. So a lot of time has passed on Earth, but for them, not much time has passed because they don't age in stasis. And so they're kind of having to come to terms with life continuing on Earth without them, and events happening, and they don't find out until 30, 40 years after those events have happened. Is it even worth knowing about those events? There's a lot of that kind of discussion of, is it worth knowing something if you can't influence it in any way? And it does get into a lot of interesting discussions around humanity, the changeability of human humankind and the cyclical nature of human conflict and war, and also the corruptibility and greed that can also influence scientific discovery and technology and human advancement. The way that it often boils down to corporate greed and profitability over anything else. I think a lot of the philosophical discussions in this, especially about humankind and the ethics of humankind going into space, even if they're not directly colonizing these planets, they may be having an unknown effect on the planet or the life on those planets. And so it does kind of have a colonialization discussion, as well as being cognizant of the footprint that you leave behind when you've been somewhere, even if you're just gathering data in a respectful and non-destructive way. There's also a little bit of LGBTQIA plus representation in this, because you have an asexual character, you have a transgender character, you also have a polyamorous, polycule situation with the 4 astronauts. That was really lovely, and I love those moments of human connection and love and respect and compassion and care that you see in this dynamic. I just wish there was more of it. It's just barely touched upon, and I wanted more of that. I think that the best moments in this were the joy of scientific discovery and the power of human connection. And so I think that I just wanted more of that emotional meat, I suppose, to the story. I think that this book would work well for a lot of people. I think that I would still recommend it, but I had some complaints just about how the characters felt a little bit two-dimensional, a little bit flat. There wasn't enough characterization of them beyond just their role on this scientific crew and maybe like one personality trait. I just wish there was a little bit more about each of them, but also just more of the dynamic between the 4 of them. I wanted to just see them sitting around on the spaceship and having a meal together, discussing their interests, or watching some movies from the last 30, 40 years that they might have missed. I just kind of want to see more of those small moments that really build a relationship. I just didn't think there was enough of that in this. I know it's a short book, it has a lot to do in a short book, and I get that. I have a lot of conflicting feelings about this, and I did give it a 3-star at the time that I finished it, but the more that I talk about it, the more I'm not sure if I want to bump it up to a 3.5. But then I also think about it in the terms of how much did I take out of this in terms of enjoyment, and I did feel mostly just passive all the way through this. I did cry at this one purple tab right here. However, it wasn't a good cry, trigger warning for animal death. It was a little bit of a jarring scene because there's no other scenes like that in this book. I think it was a powerful scene, but unfortunately there was no follow through later on in the book, and I kind of wish that there was for how traumatic that one scene was. Just to be clear, it is a pretty short scene. You can easily skip it because they kind of foreshadow it leading up to those pages, so I wouldn't let that deter anybody from reading this, but just to throw it out there. By the way, I read this for a video series that I started that may or may not be posted yet, so stay tuned if it's not out yet. Even though I took things out of it and I have a lot to say in favor of it, I just don't think that it was a perfect fit for me, at least for right now, for what I wanted, so that was to be taught if fortunate. The next book that I read in September is The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling. Wow, was this a wild ride. I had so much fun with it. Before I dive into all that, let me get into the premise and the setup. This takes place in a medieval castle keep with some grounds inside of the castle walls. Think like Helm's Deep, if you like Lord of the Rings. Inside of the castle wall there are civilians, there are soldiers, there's the king and his retinue and all of his servants and everything. There's also our 3 main characters who we have alternating POVs of. There's a mad woman who's basically a witch. There's a lady knight in service of the king. And the 3rd character is a proper lady who turned street urchin because of situations that happened in the past. Everybody that is inside of this castle keep cannot leave. They are barricaded in because they are surrounded by the enemy army of the nation they're at war with. They've been barricaded in this castle keep for months. They're running out of food and supplies. There's been plagues and pestilence going on inside of this castle, and people are starting to get very desperate. The king goes to the mad woman, this witch, and basically commands her to do the impossible, generate food out of nothing. Basically just asking her to create a miracle. And so she tries and nothing is working until one day these 4 mysterious figures just appear inside of the castle grounds one day. They seem to be these divine 4 saints of the religious system that this country worships. They're glowing and they're gold and silver, and they bring these bountiful feasts and food and water to all the people. People are celebrating, the king is praising them, and everything seems to be well. But some of the characters start to notice that something is not right, and what if these saints are not who they claim to be? And from there, things just start to unravel and go fucking crazy. This is definitely a wild ride of mind fucks and debauchery and cannibalism, and it is very, very strange. I really can't say more than what I said on the premise because the rest of it is just a fever dream, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Is this a perfect book? No. Do I have problems with it? Yes. There's definitely some moments and things that happen that seem too coincidental or too convenient, or characters making decisions that are totally out of character for them, or having certain things happen to characters or them gaining certain abilities that seem totally out of the blue, to the point where you're questioning, even by the end of the book, how much of this is actually real and how much of it is actually happening. However, this book was absolutely what I wanted in the moment and was exactly what I needed. I really just wanted something very weird, very strange, disturbing, and messed up. And I will say this wasn't as disturbing as I expected it to be. I was kind of expecting it to go even further, and I kind of wish it did go further. And while there are things with it that I don't love, I still had a really, really good time, and I did give this one 4 stars. I think if you enjoy a really strange, twisty book where you're not really sure how much of it is real, you don't really know what's going on, you just want to be taken along for the journey and put on a wild ride, I think this would be fun for you. And that was The Starving Saints. So at the time of filming this, we are exactly halfway through the month. It is September 15th today. So I will definitely come back with more finished books before the end of the month. Now it's on to future me, so I will see you then. Hello, here to talk about the next few books that I read in this month. I don't know why I'm so red right now. We're just gonna move right along. The next book that I read in September is One's Company by Ashley Hudson. This one is a contemporary literary fiction, and it follows our main character Bonnie after she wins an obscene amount of money in the lottery. She decides that she wants to uproot her entire life and fuck off to the wilderness and never see another human soul ever again. And more specifically, with her lottery winnings, she wants to buy a huge amount of property and build from scratch the apartment building and the surrounding buildings from her favorite TV show, Three's Company. And you watch her as she creates this flawless imitation of her favorite TV show, and her goal is to live out the rest of her life there, reenacting the lives of all of the characters of the show. Obviously, that's an insane premise, and it's definitely a little delusional. The level of attention to detail and how upset she gets if anything is wrong is also very drastic and dramatic, and so there is definitely an underlying obsession, and a lot of that obsession is fueled by the trauma that she's been through in her life. There's been some very traumatic events that have happened to her, but also a lot of neglect, and so she has a very distant relationship with most people and has a really hard time connecting to people. She's also very disconnected from her own self, and she has a very distorted view of her own identity and lack of identity. It's interesting to see the way that she uses the show and the protective bubble of this alternate reality to shield herself from her trauma and to avoid talking about it. And she's very self-aware that she's avoiding it. She knows that she doesn't want to talk about it, and she thinks that therapy would be a waste of time. And she doesn't really want to share her obsession or her love for the show with anybody else because she doesn't want them and their opinions of it and of her to taint this perfect reality of the show, this dream that she has. So Bonnie is definitely a very interesting character to be following, and naturally I was feeling a lot of concern for her and being like, girl, you need therapy, like you need help. But then she was like, I don't need therapy, or I don't think therapy would help me. I ended up really enjoying this one, and it's not my typical genre. I don't really read a lot of contemporary or literary, but this month I did get into a couple. It definitely makes me want to pick up some more contemporary and literary because I had a good time with it, and it's nice to branch out once in a while. So I gave this one 4 stars, and I had a really great time with it. So that is One's Company by Ashley Hudson. The next one I'm just going to go into very briefly because it's a graphic novel, but it's also in a series, and that is Heartstopper Volume 5. I can't really talk about this one too much because it's the 5th in a series, so I'm just going to very quickly go over how I felt about it. As with the rest of the series, I really enjoyed all of these. They're just such a wholesome, cute, silly, goofy time, and I really enjoy reading them. I love Nick and Charlie as characters, and I love their relationship. I love a lot of the side characters and the way that we get to see their relationships and their own personal growth as well. The major arc or focus of this story was very relatable, and I think that it is very realistic and applicable to a lot of people, especially young adults and young teens who are going through this. It talks a lot about intimacy and being vulnerable with each other, communicating with your partner about what you want out of the relationship, and maybe discussing the next step for the couple and things like that. So it's very vulnerable and touching and sweet, and overall I really liked the main kind of plot of this one, if you could call it a plot. I also liked the elaboration that we got to see on some of the other side stories that were going on, and once again this does get into kind of emotional territory and maybe some topics that will resonate a lot for people, especially if you are queer or if you're a teen, which this is targeted for anyways. And so I think this was a great experience, and like all the other ones I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 5-star. I had a great time. I cannot wait for Volume 6 to come out whenever it does, and that is Heartstopper Volume 5. The next book that I read this month is one that I got from my library as a digital copy, and that is A Girl Returned by Donatella di Pietrantonio, which I probably did the last name really, really bad. Sorry if you are Italian and I probably butchered that. I tried my best. So this one is another contemporary literary fiction, and it follows a young, unnamed teenage teenage girl who has just been dropped off to the house of a family that she has never met. It turns out that our main character was actually raised by her aunt and uncle until she was about 13, and then brought back, and now they are giving her back to her birth family. So now she not only has to reckon with the fact that she is ripped from the only home and family she has ever known and thrown into this new strange family. Not only that, but the family is also not doing very well. The father is working all the time, and the sons are always getting into trouble, but not only that, they're also kind of fucking creeps, and they have a brand new baby as well. So the main character is now the 5th child in this house, and already they're very overloaded. They're having to share beds and a bedroom with the boys, having very little to eat and very little money. Whereas the family that she was raised with by her aunt and uncle were very well off, and she's not entitled about it by any means, but it's definitely a huge change for her, and she has to contend with that huge change in her lifestyle, but also struggling with a lot of feelings of abandonment and betrayal from who she thought was her mother and father, because they brought her back to her birth family and gave her very poor excuses for why they did this, and then basically went radio silent. So the book is pretty heavy and sad because of all of that, but also it gets into some uncomfortable topics. Trigger warning for incest. So yeah, with all of those warnings and the context out of the way, I still really had a good time reading this. I actually read it in one day because I was just so engrossed. From beginning to end, I was hooked. It is a very short book, so it was easy to get through, but the pacing and the structure of the story was really well done, in my opinion. It's not like a high-action book by any means, but you do have a lot of slow character development, and just watching everything kind of unfold, and our main character go through and navigate all of these different feelings about abandonment and family, and watching her dynamic with her new sister and baby brother as well is really wholesome. And so, despite a lot of the uncomfortable topics, it does have a lot of brightness in it as well, and I really had a good time with this. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars, and the 0.5 off was just because of a couple small things. It wasn't really a happy book by any means, but it does have some bright moments, and it kept me engrossed, so that's why I gave it such a high score. It's almost the end of the month now, and I just started working full-time, so I probably won't get around to finishing any more books this month. So next time I see you will either be for the next reading update or just recap and outro. But anyway, see you then. And so that is everything that I finished reading in September. I am still currently reading If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio and Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. Oh, that's actually really funny. I didn't think about that. So those are my 2 in-progress books. I was not able to finish them before the end of the month. By the way, I now have a Discord server for my booktube community, and it's just a small little group right now. It would be awesome if you joined. It is called 9 Lives, Burgers, and Fries, which is a mashup of some of my niche interests. Let me bring forth the reference material. If you couldn't tell by my thumbnail, where I show my Locked Tomb series, I am a huge fan of the Locked Tomb, and when I was coming up with a name for the server, I was trying to think of something that would integrate the Locked Tomb in some way, but also cats because I've got the cats in my username. So generally, when you're making a community online, you want to make it as approachable and versatile and broad as possible. And so naturally, what I did was I took a very niche reference from the 3rd book in my favorite series, and I said, yeah, that's great. So throw that in there, little mental illness to spice it up. And by the way, the burgers reference it's literally just this logo on her shirt from a burger place. In case you also couldn't tell, I have a Noodle the Knife print on my wall, which is also from this cover. So yeah. Oh, don't look at my wall! Anyway, yeah, that's the origin story for my Discord server, so if you would like to join and chat and potentially engage in some shenanigans, thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe. It means a lot to me that you're here. Let me know in the comments down below what was your favorite book that you read in September, and if you're currently reading anything right now. And if you want to drop a comment but you're not sure what to say, drop the fire emoji for catching fire, of course, and I will see you in the next one. Whoa, I raised my hand way too early. You're just gonna take that. We're leaving now. Bye!